You're about to hear a story of a war fought not with bullets and bombs, but with pencils, punch cards, and an extraordinary brilliance hidden deep beneath the surface. A story of how a small, unassuming team, dismissed by their enemies and largely forgotten by history, achieved one of the most decisive victories of World War II, shattering an empire's ambitions with nothing but information. Imagine a world teetering on the brink, where the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean held secrets that could determine the fate of nations. In the early days of World War II, the Imperial Japanese Navy, fresh from its devastating strike on Pearl Harbor, believed it held an insurmountable advantage, an unbreakable code. This cryptographic marvel, known as JN-25, was their shield and sword, a digital fortress safeguarding their every move, their most ambitious plans, their very strategy for dominion. They were supremely confident, bordering on arrogant, certain that no Western mind could ever penetrate its mathematical and linguistic complexity. They were wrong. Catastrophically wrong. What if I told you that the turning point of the Pacific War, the legendary Battle of Midway, wasn't won by superior firepower or unexpected tactics, but by a handful of mathematicians and linguists huddled in a perpetually cold, smoke-filled basement? What if I revealed that the Japanese Navy, the architects of some of history's most audacious naval strategies, fought the entire war blindfolded, their every secret thought laid bare to an enemy they never suspected was listening? This isn't just a tale of code-breaking. It's a profound narrative about the unseen forces that shape history, the insidious power of hubris, and the enduring truth that in any conflict, visible or invisible, information truly is power. Prepare to descend into the dungeon of Station Hypo, where the silent war was won, and an empire's destiny was irrevocably altered. Let's first understand the monumental challenge that lay before the American codebreakers. The Imperial Japanese Navy introduced JN-25 on June 1, 1939, as a replacement for an older system that had been in use since 1931. To the Japanese cryptographers, particularly those in the Navy's 4th Department of Communications, JN-25 was not just an improvement. It was the zenith of cryptographic security, a system designed with such intricate layers that they genuinely believed it to be mathematically impenetrable. It was a two-layered marvel, engineered to require computational power that simply didn't exist at the time, or so they thought. The first layer was a massive codebook. In its initial version, this book contained approximately 30,000 five-digit code groups, each representing words, common phrases, or even individual syllables. By 1942, this had expanded to nearly 45,000 groups. A crucial, seemingly innocuous detail was that every single one of these five-digit numbers was divisible by 3. This wasn't a cryptographic feature per se, but a garble check intended to help identify transmission errors. If a radio operator received a five-digit group that wasn't divisible by 3, they knew a mistake had occurred. Ironically, this seemingly helpful quirk would become one of the American cryptanalysts' first, most vital footholds into the system. It offered a statistical regularity, a tell in a system designed to have none. The second layer was false addition, a method of disguising the already encoded messages. After a message was converted into a string of these five-digit code groups, it was then subjected to a second process of encryption. Each code group would be false added, with a random number drawn from separate cipher tables. These cipher tables contained an astounding 50,000 possible additives, sequences of random numbers, making the total combinations astronomical. This was designed to obscure any patterns in the underlying code groups, rendering the message, in the eyes of its Japanese creators, utterly opaque. Captain Itos Tsuno, the head of the Japanese Navy's Communications Security Section, personally oversaw JN-25's development. His pride in the system was immense, and understandably so. In post-war interrogations, a reflective but still incredulous Tsuno would admit, "We believed the system was absolutely secure. The possibilities were astronomical. With tens of thousands of code groups and 50,000 additives, the combinations exceeded anything that could be analyzed by human calculation." This statement captures the essence of Japanese overconfidence. Their belief wasn't merely that JN-25 was difficult to break. It was that it was impossible, transcending the very limits of human intellect. And in a sense, they were right about human intellect alone. If decryption relied solely on teams of mathematicians painstakingly working through combinations by hand, JN-25 might indeed have held its secrets until the end of the war. The sheer volume of data, the seemingly infinite permutations, were designed to overwhelm. But the Japanese made a fatal, culturally ingrained miscalculation, one that speaks volumes about the blind spots inherent in any intelligence apparatus rooted in technological conservatism. They had never imagined that the Americans would adapt commercial IBM tabulating equipment for cryptanalytic purposes. These weren't computers in the modern sense, but they were the industrial workhorses of the information age. Machines designed for mundane tasks like processing census data, tracking inventory, or calculating payrolls were about to be weaponized. These electromechanical marvels could sort through millions of combinations in hours, identify subtle patterns that would remain invisible to the most brilliant human mind, and perform calculations that would take teams of mathematicians years to complete manually. This was the nascent dawn of information warfare, a seismic shift that Japan's traditional, manual-centric approach to cryptography was utterly unequipped to counter. The battlefield was shifting, not just from land to sea to air, but into the realm of pure data. And one side was still bringing swords to a gunfight. The challenge wasn't linear. Just as American cryptanalysts began making headway against JN-25A, gathering enough fragmented understanding to piece together perhaps 10 to 15% of intercepted messages, a crushing blow landed on December 1, 1940. JN-25B replaced JN-25A, just over a year before Pearl Harbor. Months of arduous, painstaking work were instantly rendered useless. It was like painstakingly mapping out a fortress, only for the enemy to suddenly rebuild it with entirely new blueprints. They had to start from scratch, rebuilding their understanding of the new system while war clouds gathered ominously over the Pacific. The frustration, the despair, must have been immense. It was a race against time, a desperate scramble to regain vision before the inevitable conflict engulfed them. By the morning of December 7, 1941, the day Pearl Harbor was attacked, the team had only managed to recover enough to read a mere 10 to 15% of intercepted messages. This was enough to sense increased Japanese naval activity, a dangerous hum of preparations, but not enough to predict the precise location of the strike. The warnings were vague, the indicators ambiguous. The devastating surprise of Pearl Harbor underscored their critical vulnerability, fueling a desperate resolve to penetrate the Japanese code fully. The stakes were no longer theoretical. They were measured in American lives and shattered battleships. The epicenter of this silent war was Station Hypo, nestled in a windowless basement beneath Pearl Harbor's administrative building in Hawaii. One visitor famously described it as the most depressing military workspace in the Pacific. There was no natural light, just the harsh glare of fluorescent tubes. The air grew progressively stale, thick with cigarette smoke from chain-smoking analysts. The constant rhythmic hum of IBM machines provided a relentless soundtrack to their efforts. It was a sensory assault, a crucible of intellectual combat. This dank, cold, poorly ventilated space, appropriately nicknamed the dungeon, was where the fate of the Pacific War would ultimately be decided. Yet, within this oppressive environment, Commander Joseph John Rochefort had assembled what Admiral Chester Nimitz would later hail as the most valuable intelligence unit in the history of naval warfare. Rochefort himself was an enigma. He shuffled across the basement floor in his slippers and a red smoking jacket, a bathrobe he'd worn for so many consecutive days that his staff had simply stopped noticing it. His desk sign, a wry testament to the intensity of their work, read, "You don't have to be crazy to work here, but it helps." This disheveled, eccentric appearance concealed one of the most brilliant cryptanalytic minds in the U.S. Navy, a man driven by an almost obsessive intuition and an uncanny ability to connect disparate pieces of information. His staff adored him. His superiors often found him infuriatingly unconventional, but no one could deny his genius. The team itself was small, roughly 30 to 50 personnel at its peak during the Midway Crisis, a seemingly insignificant number compared to the vast navies clashing above. But these were not ordinary men. They were a constellation of brilliant, often eccentric minds, each bringing a unique piece to the puzzle. There was Lieutenant Commander Wesley Ham Wright, whose rugged, almost burly physical resemblance to actor Wallace Beery belied a razor-sharp mathematical genius. Wright was legendary for his endurance, often working problems for 48 hours straight, sustained only by an endless stream of coffee and an iron will. He was the kind of person who saw the universe in numbers, capable of holding complex algorithms in his head and manipulating them with astonishing speed. Then there was Lieutenant Joseph Finnegan, whom his colleagues affectionately called our Babe Ruth, for his ability to hit cryptanalytic home runs. Finnegan had barely survived the Pearl Harbor attack itself, pulled from the burning USS Tennessee. His desire for revenge, for striking back against the enemy, fueled an intensity in his code-breaking work that worried even Rochefort. He channeled his rage and grief into decryption with a relentless focus. It would be Finnegan who made the crucial breakthrough in solving the Japanese date-time cipher, working backward from intercepted weather reports to crack the super-encipherment that protected operational dates. His personal experience of the war's brutality undoubtedly sharpened his resolve, transforming personal anguish into a strategic weapon. Marine Major Halva Red Laswell served as chief translator, a mathematical genius who had never even finished high school. Despite his lack of formal education, Laswell possessed an intuitive, almost preternatural understanding of Japanese language patterns, which proved invaluable. Witnesses described him hunched over Japanese texts, a green eyeshade pulled low against the fluorescent lights, a cigar clenched in his teeth, utterly absorbed in the intricate dance of characters and meanings. He was a natural, a savant of semantics, who could feel the rhythm of the Japanese language even in its encrypted form. Commander Thomas Dyer, another mathematical genius, was responsible for many crucial breakthroughs. He maintained a sign that perfectly captured the dungeon's atmosphere, a grim reminder of their relentless pace. After particularly intense sessions, Dyer would emerge unshaven, his eyes bloodshot from chronic lack of sleep, his gait betraying how close he was to utter exhaustion. These were men pushed to their physical and mental limits, driven by the knowledge that every minute of their work could save countless lives. They were fighting a war in a windowless room against an unseen enemy, with only their intellect and a handful of machines as their weapons. By May 1942, this small beleaguered team had recovered enough of JN-25B's code groups and additives to read approximately 40% of intercepted Japanese naval traffic. This wasn't enough for word-for-word translations, which would have been ideal, but it was sufficient for what intelligence professionals call gisting, determining the general meaning and, crucially, the operational significance of Japanese communications. They could grasp the gist, the intent, the direction of the enemy's plans, even if they couldn't reconstruct every single word. It was like seeing through a frosted window. The image was blurry, but the outlines were unmistakable, and those outlines were enough to turn the tide of a global war. The revolution that underpinned Station Hypo's success was the adaptation of International Business Machines Corporation equipment for code breaking. While the Japanese continued to rely on manual, human-centric encryption and decryption, essentially employing 19th century technology, the Americans embraced the mechanical age. Station Hypo operated an array of IBM machines, 601 multiplying punches, sorters, collators, tabulators, and key punches. These were not primitive calculators. They were powerful electromechanical processors, capable of handling thousands of punch cards per hour. Each card, a small rectangle of stiff paper, contained 80 columns of data representing intercepted code groups. It was the industrialization of intelligence. The critical breakthrough in mechanization came through systematic pattern recognition, a concept that now forms the bedrock of modern data science. Cryptanalyst Thomas Dyer, observing the habits of Japanese radio operators, realized that despite instructions to begin encoding at random points in their cipher tables, these operators, being human, often resorted to convenience. They would habitually start at easily remembered locations, page 1, line 1, or other predictable positions. This seemingly minor human weakness, a product of fatigue or routine, created subtle patterns. And those patterns were precisely what the IBM machines were designed to identify and exploit. In April 1942, a single IBM run yielded something extraordinary. The machines identified that certain groups of 5-digit numbers appeared repeatedly at the beginning of messages. Ham Wright, with his mathematical brilliance, hypothesized that these might represent numerals, as Japanese messages often began with references like, "Your message number 473. To test this theory, he compared these newly identified patterns with an old Japanese diplomatic code that the U.S. Navy had obtained years earlier, one that the Japanese themselves considered obsolete. The comparison confirmed Wright's theory. The Japanese were indeed using the same numeral encoding system they thought had been discarded. This was a critical crib, a known plaintext segment that could unlock entire messages. It was like finding a loose brick in an otherwise impregnable wall. The custom modifications to the IBM equipment were truly remarkable. showcasing an ingenuity that often goes unnoticed in the shadow of the larger war. By spring 1941, the Navy had commissioned purpose-built machines with over 75 special attachments, designed specifically for cryptanalytic functions. These weren't off-the-shelf business machines. They were bespoke instruments of war, tailored to the unique demands of code breaking. These specialized machines could perform depth analysis, identifying messages encoded with identical additive sequences in minutes, a task that would have taken days for human analysts. One Navy report highlighted the staggering difference. Comparing two 200-letter messages for patterns took a skilled analyst 10 hours by hand. The IBM equipment could process the same comparison in under 3 minutes. The investment was staggering for the era. The Navy was spending hundreds of thousands of dollars annually on IBM equipment rental and custom modifications. The machines consumed so much electricity that Station Hypo required its own dedicated power supply, a testament to the sheer computational load. Yet, without these machines, without this embrace of nascent technology, breaking JN-25 would have been utterly impossible. The Japanese Navy's confidence in JN-25 bordered on absolute faith, a misplaced trust that ultimately proved their undoing. Commander Yamamoto Yuji, a senior cryptographic officer, would testify after the war with an air of profound disbelief. We considered the Americans incapable of understanding our language at the level required for cryptanalysis. Combined with our mathematical security, we believed JN-25 was not just unbreakable. We believed the Americans wouldn't even attempt to break it. This arrogance permeated Japanese military thinking. The Naval General Staff's intelligence assessment in 1941 boldly stated that fewer than 100 Americans possessed sufficient Japanese language skills for military translation, and none had the combination of linguistic and mathematical expertise required for cryptanalysis. They were catastrophically wrong. The U.S. Navy had been systematically training officers in Japanese since the 1920s, sending them to live in Japan for years to achieve near-native fluency. These were the pre-war products, a generation of dedicated linguists whose quiet, unsung work now paid dividends. But the Japanese made another, equally critical error, an oversight that every modern cybersecurity expert would recognize as a fundamental flaw. They assumed that code security rested solely on mathematical complexity. They ignored the human factors that inevitably create cryptographic vulnerabilities. Consider the human element. Radio operators under pressure. Under the stress of wartime operations, operators took shortcuts, deviating from strict protocols to expedite messages. Tired clerks. Exhausted, overworked clerks began encoding at convenient, easily remembered starting points in their cipher tables, introducing predictable patterns. Weather stations. These stations sent reports at identical times each day, often using predictable formats and even stereotyped language, creating invaluable cribs, known or guessed plaintext that could unlock entire messages. Supply officers. Transmitted requisitions with standardized, repetitive language, again creating patterns the machines could exploit. Each of these human tendencies, seemingly minor on their own, provided Station Hypo's analysts with vital footholds. The elegance of JN-25's mathematical design was undermined by the inherent messiness of human behavior, a truth that remains relevant in an age of sophisticated algorithms and human error-driven data breaches. Even more damaging was the Japanese Navy's institutional rigidity. a cultural trait that produced unwavering loyalty, but also prevented critical self-examination of security procedures. When unusual events occurred, American carriers appearing at precisely the right defensive positions, American submarines lying in wait along secret routes where they shouldn't have known to be. Naval leadership attributed these coincidences to superior American reconnaissance or sheer luck, rather than considering the devastating possibility of communications compromise. Their belief in their own invulnerability was a cognitive shield against uncomfortable truths. Post-war testimony from Japanese admirals revealed the shocking depth of this delusion. Admiral Fuku Shigeru, Yamamoto's chief of staff, stated, "Even after the war, when Americans told us they had been reading our codes, many officers refused to believe it. They insisted there must have been traitors." This wasn't merely denial, it was a profound institutional blindness, a failure of imagination rooted in unwavering faith in their system, and a culturally embedded disdain for admitting internal flaws. They simply could not conceive of being outsmarted in this particular way. April 28, 1942, marked the true beginning of the end for Japanese cryptographic security, a date that would send shivers down the spines of the basement crew at Station Hypo. On that day, an intercepted message electrified the dungeon. Japanese naval forces were ordered to complete all preparations and await further orders. The target was designated only as AF. Rochefort had seen this designator before. His team had been tracking AF references for weeks, noting that whenever Japanese forces operated near Midway Atoll, the designation appeared in their communications. But correlation wasn't proof, and a fierce bureaucratic battle raged. Washington's codebreakers at OP-20G, the Navy's main cryptanalysis center, insisted with equal conviction that AF meant the Aleutian Islands, far to the north, or even Hawaii itself. Admiral Nimitz, caught between these conflicting intelligence assessments, faced an agonizing decision. A wrong guess could doom his fleet. Rochefort needed irrefutable proof, a definitive confirmation of the target. The ingenious solution came from Jasper Holmes, a submarine officer forcibly retired due to arthritis who had been recalled to serve in intelligence. Holmes, understanding Midway's critical vulnerability, knew the island's water supply depended entirely on a desalination plant. On May 19th, Rochefort proposed Holmes's deception plan to Edwin Layton, Nimitz's intelligence officer. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity and daring. Using the secure underwater cable connecting Pearl Harbor to Midway, a line impossible for the Japanese to tap, they would instruct Midway's garrison to broadcast an emergency message in plain language, reporting that their water distillation plant had suffered an explosion. The trap was set. On May 20th, Midway broadcast the fake distress call on frequencies the Japanese routinely monitored. Within 24 hours, Japanese intelligence at Kwajalein intercepted the American message and, critically, immediately reported the sensitive information to Combined Fleet Headquarters using JN-25. The decoded Japanese message screamed, "AF is short of fresh water due to failure of distillation plant." When Station Hypo decoded this Japanese message on May 22nd, the basement erupted in cheers. They had not only confirmed Midway as the target, but had also proven, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that they were reading current Japanese operational traffic. The Japanese had swallowed the deception completely, never questioning why the Americans would broadcast such sensitive information in clear text. Their arrogance had blinded them to the most obvious of traps. Knowing where the Japanese would attack was crucial, but Nimitz also desperately needed to know when. Japanese messages included date-time groups that were super-enciphered, encrypted separately before being encoded in JN25. This additional layer had frustrated American cryptanalysts for months. The breakthrough came through painstaking analysis of seemingly mundane weather reports. Joseph Finnegan, with his Babe Ruth intuition, noticed that Japanese weather stations transmitted at precise times each day, and their reports always included the date and time of observation. By meticulously comparing hundreds of these messages with known transmission times, Finnegan and Wright gradually constructed a date-time table, a Rosetta Stone that could convert the super-enciphered date-time groups back to readable dates. On May 24th, the system yielded its secret. A message from Yamamoto specified end day as June 4th, with the attack to commence at 0200 Tokyo time. Another intercept confirmed the Midway invasion force would arrive on June 7th, 3 days after the carrier strike. Edwin Layton, reviewing these decrypts, made his now famous prediction to Admiral Nimitz. "Admiral," he began, "the Japanese will attack Midway on June 4th. They will approach from the northwest at bearing 325 degrees. They will launch their aircraft at AO 400 local time from a position 175 miles from Midway." Nimitz, a cautious and shrewd commander, studied his intelligence officer carefully before responding. "You're confident in this assessment, Layton?" Layton's reply, delivered with a calm assurance born of unprecedented intelligence, is etched into history. "Admiral, I'll be wrong by 5 minutes, 5 degrees, and 5 miles at most." On June 4th, 1942, at 0534 local time, a PBY Catalina flying boat spotted the Japanese carrier force bearing 320 Akakur, distance 180 miles from Midway. The intelligence had been virtually perfect. The prediction was fulfilled with astonishing accuracy, a testament to the quiet heroes in the Pearl Harbor basement. The crown jewel of Station Hypo's code-breaking came on May 20th with the interception of Operational Order 14. This massive 12-part message contained Admiral Yamamoto's entire battle plan, a blueprint of Japanese strategy. It detailed force composition, timing, and coordination between the Midway attack and a simultaneous diversionary strike on the Aleutian Islands. The decoded sections revealed staggering detail. The first carrier striking force, under Admiral Nagumo, would approach Midway from the northwest with 4 carriers: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. These ships would carry 248 aircraft. The invasion force would include 5,000 troops aboard 12 transports. Support forces would include 7 battleships, including the legendary Yamato, the largest battleship ever built. Crucially, intercepts in early May confirmed that 2 of Japan's newest carriers, Shokaku and Zuikaku, which had been damaged at the Battle of Coral Sea, would not participate in the Midway operation. This reduced Japanese carrier strength from 6 to 4, dramatically improving American odds. Other intercepted messages filled in vital operational details. A May 13th communication revealed precise submarine deployments. Submarine Squadron 3 will establish patrol line 150 miles northwest of Hawaii by N-2 day. Knowing this, Nimitz ordered his carriers to leave Pearl Harbor on May 28th and 30th, before the Japanese submarines arrived on June 2nd. This preemptive move allowed the American fleet to lie in ambush, unseen and unsuspected. Supply messages exposed the operation's massive scale and, paradoxically, its vulnerabilities. One intercept specified fuel requirements. Tanker Group will provide 2,800 tons heavy oil on 200 tons aviation fuel at a position 30 degrees north, 170 degrees east on N+3 day. Such details not only confirmed timing, but revealed that the Japanese were operating at the extreme limit of their logistical capabilities. This insight allowed American planners to understand the enemy's constraints and predict their operational tempo. Not everyone, however, believed Station Hypo's analysis. In Washington, Commander John Redman headed OP-20G, the Navy's main cryptanalytic center, and he fundamentally disagreed with Rochefort's methods and conclusions. Where Rochefort relied on linguistic understanding, intuition, and a willingness to take risks, Redman emphasized pure mathematical analysis, rigid adherence to established protocols, and a more cautious approach. The Redman brothers, John in cryptanalysis and his brother, Rear Admiral Joseph, as Director of Naval Communications, were powerful figures. They convinced Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, that Rochefort was a maverick, ignoring proper channels and feeding Nimitz unreliable intelligence. On May 14th, OP-20G issued a formal intelligence estimate, stating the Japanese target was probably the Aleutian Islands, possibly the west coast of the United States. They accused Hypo of wish fulfillment, seeing what they wanted in ambiguous intercepts. This bureaucratic battle nearly derailed American preparations for Midway. Admiral King, who disliked Rochefort's unmilitary appearance and his direct communication with Nimitz, was inclined to side with Washington. It took Nimitz's personal intervention, backed by the irrefutable AF water shortage proof, to maintain focus on Midway. This internal conflict highlights a recurring challenge in intelligence: the battle between rigorous analysis and intuitive genius, and the bureaucratic resistance to unconventional success. Even after Hypo's stunning vindication at Midway, the Redman brothers sought revenge. They convinced King that Station Hypo had been lucky rather than good, and that proper cryptanalytic work required Washington's centralized control. By October 1942, Rochefort, the man who had made the Midway victory possible, would be relieved of command and sent to oversee a floating dry dock, a humiliating, unjust end to his intelligence career, a casualty of bureaucratic infighting and petty jealousy. The breaking of JN-25 was not a purely American achievement. It required unprecedented international cooperation, a testament to the global nature of the struggle against the Axis powers. The British Far East Combined Bureau, FECB, originally established in Hong Kong in 1935, had actually achieved the first breakthrough against JN-25 in 1939. John Tiltman, working at Bletchley Park, the famous British code-breaking center, identified the system's basic structure and, crucially, the divisibility by 3 that marked all valid code groups. This seemingly minor mathematical property became the initial key, the first crack in the Japanese fortress. When Japan introduced JN-25B on December 1, 1940, the British made an immediate and vital discovery that saved months of work for all Allied cryptanalysts. The Japanese had changed the codebook, but critically they had not changed the additive tables. This meant that messages encoded in late November using JN-25A and early December using JN-25B, if they happened to contain similar content, could be compared to strip away the encryption layer. It was like peeling back a transparent overlay to reveal the original text. By March 1941, FECB had recovered nearly 3,000 code groups, which they promptly shared with the Americans, jump-starting their efforts. The Dutch also made a significant contribution. Khmer 14, their code-breaking unit at Bandung Technical College in Java, led by Lieutenant Commander Leo Brewer, had been intercepting Japanese naval communications since 1936. They possessed unique insights into Japanese radio procedures and traffic analysis, providing valuable context that complemented the Anglo-American efforts. When Java fell in March 1942, Brewer and his team, rather than surrender, escaped to Australia with boxes of punch cards containing partially decoded messages, safeguarding their invaluable work. Station Cast, located on Corregidor in the Philippines, made a crucial discovery before their evacuation. In March 1942, they determined that AF was the Japanese designation for Midway, information they relayed to Station Hypo just before being evacuated by submarine. The 74 personnel of CAST were considered so valuable that they were evacuated in multiple submarine runs between February and April 1942, eventually reforming as FRUMEL, Fleet Radio Unit Melbourne, in Australia. The coordination between these geographically dispersed units was remarkable, especially given the distances involved and the primitive communications technologies of the era. Decoded messages were shared via secure cable. Recovered code groups were distributed through diplomatic pouches, and intercept coverage was synchronized to avoid gaps. By May 1942, the Allies were intercepting approximately 60% of all Japanese naval radio traffic, though they could only decode about 40% of what they intercepted. This global collaboration, born of necessity, laid the groundwork for future intelligence alliances, including the Five Eyes Agreement between the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, which continues to this day. The Imperial Japanese Navy's inability to detect JN-25's compromise stemmed not from a single flaw, but from a confluence of institutional failures that extended far beyond mere overconfidence. Their intelligence structure itself was a liability. It was rigidly divided between the Third Department, Intelligence Gathering and Analysis, and the Fourth Department, Communications and Cryptography. This created bureaucratic walls that prevented a comprehensive security assessment. The code makers in the Fourth Department were too insulated from the intelligence users in the Third Department, and neither had a holistic view of the operational realities that might hint at a compromise. Captain Hitaru Tachibana, who headed the Third Department's American section, admitted after the war with stark honesty, "We had no mechanism to correlate operational failures with possible communications compromise. This is a profoundly critical point. When American forces appeared at optimal positions, the Operations Department blamed poor reconnaissance. No one, it seems, dared to consider the unthinkable, that the Americans might be reading their most secret messages. It was always an external failure, never an internal one. Ironically, the Japanese Navy's own security procedures actually facilitated American code breaking. Message originators were required to include full titles and unit designations, providing invaluable contextual clues that helped analysts identify the content of messages. Acknowledgement messages often repeated key portions of the original communications, creating readily identifiable pairs that could be used for depth analysis. Weather reports, transmitted at identical times daily, provided predictable cribs, known plaintext segments that were consistently used, allowing analysts to infer the encryption used for that specific time and date. Even physical security failures went unnoticed. The January 20th, 1942 sinking of the Japanese submarine I-124 in shallow water off Darwin, Australia, should have triggered immediate concern. The submarine carried current code books that Australian divers might recover. Yet, the Japanese made no emergency code changes, assuming the water depth would prevent salvage. They were wrong. Australian divers recovered significant cryptographic material, which was immediately shared with American code breakers. This astonishing oversight spoke volumes about their blind faith in the system. Perhaps the most incredible testament to Japanese institutional blindness occurred on June 7, 1942, just 3 days after Midway. The Chicago Tribune published an article under the headline, "Navy Had Word of Plan to Strike at Sea." Reporter Stanley Johnston revealed details that were obtainable only through code breaking. Johnston, who had been aboard the carrier Lexington when it sank at Coral Sea, had seen classified message traffic while recovering on the cruiser Chester. His article specified Japanese force composition, ship names, and operational intentions. Information that screamed, "Code compromise." President Roosevelt was furious, considering prosecution under the Espionage Act. Navy Secretary Frank Knox even wanted Tribune publisher Colonel Robert McCormick court-martialed, despite his civilian status. The Navy prepared charges that could have resulted in the death penalty. Yet, incredibly, Japanese intelligence never noticed the article. No Japanese agent in America reported it. No neutral diplomat mentioned it. No German intelligence officer with whom the Japanese had an alliance warned their counterparts. The revelation that should have prompted immediate, fundamental changes to JN-25 passed completely unnoticed. The grand jury proceedings nearly caused more damage than the original article, as prosecutors would have had to explain exactly what Johnston revealed and why it mattered. Testimony that would confirm American code-breaking success. Recognizing this danger, the Navy dropped all charges, leaving the Tribune unpunished, but the secret miraculously intact. This episode remains one of the most astonishing intelligence failures in history, demonstrating a level of insularity and denial that borders on the surreal. For the cryptanalysts of Station Hypo, victory at Midway brought not celebration, but intensified pressure. They knew that the Japanese would eventually change their codes, potentially blinding American intelligence at a crucial moment. Every day JN-25 remained readable was a precious gift that could end without warning. The psychological strain was enormous. These men knew when Japanese convoys would sail, where submarines would patrol, which islands would be invaded. Information that could save thousands of American lives. Yet, using this intelligence too obviously would reveal the code compromise, thus shortening the lifespan of their invaluable source. Rochefort, acutely aware of this, established strict protocols for disguising intelligence sources. Every piece of information derived from code breaking had to have a plausible alternative explanation. If decrypts revealed a convoy route, commanders were told it came from submarine sightings. When code breaking exposed invasion plans, the intelligence was attributed to captured documents or aerial reconnaissance. This elaborate dance of deception was essential to protect the golden egg, ultra-intelligence. The strain of this constant concealment showed profoundly on the cryptanalysts. Thomas Dyer developed chronic insomnia, unable to stop seeing code groups even when he closed his eyes. Wesley Wright suffered severe anxiety, convinced that each new day would bring the code change that would blind American intelligence, plunging them back into darkness. Joseph Finnegan, haunted by the Japanese messages describing American prisoners that he translated but couldn't act upon without revealing the source, began drinking heavily, trying to forget the unbearable truths he held. These were the hidden casualties of the silent war. Men whose mental and emotional well-being was sacrificed on the altar of national security. No single event better illustrated both the raw power and the profound peril of code-breaking than Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's assassination on April 18, 1943. Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor and Japan's most brilliant naval strategist, was a monumental figure. His death would devastate Japanese morale and strategic planning. In early April, Station Hypo's successor organization, the Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, FRUPAS, decoded a message containing Yamamoto's complete travel itinerary for an inspection tour of Solomon Islands bases. The message, transmitted in JN-25D, specified that Yamamoto would arrive at Bali Island at 09:45 on April 18th, flying in a Betty bomber with 6 Zero-fighter escorts. The precision of the intelligence was remarkable. Japanese staff officers had included every detail in what they believed was completely secure communication. Admiral Nimitz faced an agonizing decision. Intercepting Yamamoto's flight at the exact time and location specified would be an undeniable indicator of code compromise. The strategic gain had to be weighed against the potential loss of the ultra-secret. The decision ultimately went to President Roosevelt, who reportedly said simply, "Get him." American planners constructed an elaborate deception to mask the source. P-38 Lightning fighters would fly a 435-mile interception route at wavetop height, a path designed to appear as routine combat air patrol. Other patrols would operate in the area, creating the illusion of normal activity. Coast watchers, Allied intelligence agents operating behind enemy lines, would be credited with spotting Yamamoto's plane. On April 18th, exactly as predicted, Yamamoto's plane appeared over Bougainville. American P-38s shot down both Betty bombers, killing Yamamoto and his staff. The Japanese Navy was devastated, but incredibly, they made only routine code changes. A board of inquiry concluded that local commanders had been careless with security, never suspecting the ambush resulted from code compromise. The hubris, the institutional blindness, remained stubbornly intact. By late 1942, breaking JN-25 had evolved from a nascent art to a sophisticated industry. The expanded Station Hypo, now renamed Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, FRUPAC, occupied an entire floor of a new air-conditioned building at Pearl Harbor. IBM machines ran continuously, their rhythmic clatter filling the climate-controlled rooms. 3 shifts of cryptanalysts, translators, and intelligence analysts processed thousands of messages daily. The systematization was remarkable. Punch card operators, mostly young women recruited from Hawaii's commercial sector, entered intercepted code groups at high speed. IBM machines sorted cards by frequency, identifying potential cribs. Cryptanalysts attacked identified weaknesses, recovering new code groups and additives. Translators converted broken messages to English, while intelligence analysts synthesized information from hundreds of partial decrypts into coherent reports. Quality control became crucial. Every recovered code group was meticulously verified against multiple messages. Translation disputes were resolved by committee, with native Japanese speakers having the final say. Intelligence reports included confidence levels, distinguishing between confirmed facts and educated guesses. The scale was staggering. By January 1943, Frupak maintained a library of millions of punch cards. The IBM machines performed millions of comparisons daily. The monthly electricity bill exceeded that of a small city. Yet, for all this mechanization, human intuition remained crucial. Only experienced linguists could deduce that certain code groups represented common Japanese phrases. Only analysts familiar with Japanese doctrine could interpret operational significance, providing the crucial context that machines could not. It was a symbiotic relationship between man and machine, a foretaste of future intelligence operations. While Midway captured headlines, the systematic destruction of Japan's merchant marine through code intelligence represented JN-25's most devastating and often overlooked impact. By 1943, American submarines, guided by ultra-intelligence, were sinking Japanese ships faster than they could be replaced. This relentless attrition was strangling an island nation utterly dependent on imports for its war effort and its very survival. The intelligence advantage was decisive. Decoded messages revealed convoy routes, schedules, and escort compositions. Submarine commanders received ultra-intelligence, directing them to specific coordinates where undefended tankers or cargo ships would appear, almost like clockwork. The Japanese, never suspecting code compromise, attributed these crippling losses to the growing American submarine force rather than to intelligence failures. Consider the harrowing account of Commander Richard O'Kane, skipper of USS Tang. In October 1944, he received a decoded message revealing a convoy carrying desperately needed aviation fuel from Borneo to the Philippines. Positioned perfectly by intelligence, Tang sank 7 ships in one night, depriving Japanese aircraft of essential fuel during the crucial Battle of Leyte Gulf. The statistics were devastating. American submarines, representing less than 2% of Navy personnel, sank over 30% of Japan's warships and a staggering 60% of its merchant marine. Much of this success came directly from code intelligence, revealing not just where ships would be, but what they carried and how they were defended. By late 1944, the cumulative impact was catastrophic. Japan had lost so many tankers that warships couldn't obtain fuel, grounding entire fleets. Training was curtailed because aviation fuel was unavailable. Island garrisons starved because food transports never arrived. The Japanese economy collapsed as raw materials stopped flowing. All of this resulted from submarines guided by intelligence the Japanese never knew was compromised. They were fighting a ghost war, where their every move was known, and their arteries of supply were systematically severed. Throughout 1943 and 1944, evidence of code compromise accumulated to levels that should have been impossible to ignore. American submarines consistently intercepted convoys at their most vulnerable points. American carriers appeared wherever Japanese planning assumed they wouldn't be. American forces concentrated against Japanese attacks while leaving other areas undefended, an economy of force made possible by perfect foresight. Vice Admiral Ugaki Matome, Yamamoto's successor, noted in his diary with growing unease, "The enemy seems to have a sixth sense about our operations. Every movement is countered, every plan anticipated." Yet, even this near recognition failed to trigger a comprehensive security review. The institutional filters were too strong. the arrogance too deep-seated. The Japanese did make periodic changes to JN-25, introducing new variants roughly every 6 months. JN-25C appeared on May 28, 1942, too late for Midway. JN-25D lasted from August 1942 to March 1943. Each change temporarily reduced American readability, but never for more than a few weeks. The fundamental architecture remained unchanged, and American cryptanalysts had become so proficient, so attuned to the code's nuances, that they could recover new code groups rapidly. It was a cat-and-mouse game where the mouse was always one step ahead. The Japanese Navy's faith in their codes survived even direct, undeniable evidence. In November 1943, a decoded message revealed the exact route of a convoy carrying reinforcements to Rabaul. American destroyers intercepted and sank every transport. Among the survivors was Commander Kato Tetsuo, a communications officer who, after being rescued, reported with chilling clarity. The Americans were waiting at the exact point where we changed course. They must have broken our codes. His report was dismissed as battle fatigue. Kato was reassigned to shore duty and ordered not to discuss his delusions. This incident perfectly encapsulates the Japanese Navy's almost religious belief in their codes, a belief so strong it overrode even the most compelling evidence of compromise. For the men and women who broke JN-25, victory came with profound moral complexity. They knew their success meant death for thousands of Japanese sailors, men who were simply serving their country. Every decoded message revealing ship positions translated directly into human casualties. Alva Laswell, the Marine translator, wrote in a private letter, a raw outpouring of his soul. I decoded the message that led to Yamamoto's death. I had translated his writings, studied his thoughts. When I decoded his itinerary, I signed his death warrant. That knowledge haunts me. The burden was particularly heavy when intercepts revealed hospital ships, prisoner transports, or refugee vessels. International law protected such ships, but positive identification often came only through decoded messages. The cryptanalysts faced impossible choices: reveal intelligence that could save civilians but compromise the code, or remain silent and maintain the strategic advantage. Some messages revealed Japanese atrocities that could not be acted upon without exposing the source. Thomas Dyer later admitted, "We decoded messages about prisoner executions. We had to file them away, knowing revelation meant losing access to all future intelligence." The psychological toll manifested in various ways. Some cryptanalysts became obsessed with perfection, terrified that even a minor error might cost American lives. Others developed emotional detachment, treating decoded messages as complex puzzles rather than military intelligence with profound human consequences. Many struggled with survivor's guilt, fighting the war in the relative safety of a Pearl Harbor basement, while men they directed faced death. Their heroism was unsung, their sacrifices unseen, their burdens privately borne. Despite official neglect and bureaucratic persecution, history has unequivocally vindicated Station Hypo's achievement. Admiral Chester Nimitz, the man who trusted Rochefort when others doubted, stated unequivocally, "Without the intelligence provided by Rochefort and his team, the Pacific War would have lasted at least 2 years longer and cost hundreds of thousands more lives." General Douglas MacArthur, known for his towering ego and reluctance to share credit, admitted, "The Navy's codebreakers gave us eyes to see and ears to hear what the enemy planned. They turned the Pacific from a vast unknown into a battlefield where we knew every enemy move in advance. Even Japanese military historians acknowledge the decisive impact. Professor Tanaka Hiroshi of the Japanese Defense University wrote, "The breaking of JN-25 was more devastating than any military defeat. Throughout the war, Japan was fighting an omniscient enemy who knew our every plan." The true measure of Station Hypo's success lies not just in battles won, but in battles avoided. Knowing Japanese intentions allowed American forces to concentrate where needed, while leaving other areas undefended. This economy of force, enabled by intelligence, allowed America to fight a two-ocean war with resources that would have been insufficient without the code-breaking advantage. Yet, recognition came slowly, and often too late. Rochefort's treatment was particularly egregious. Despite Nimitz's recommendation for the Distinguished Service Medal, Admiral King, still harboring resentment, blocked it. Rochefort was relieved of a command in October 1942, sent to supervise a floating dry dock, and never received another significant intelligence assignment. The medal finally came in 1986, 10 years after his death, presented to his son by President Reagan in a White House ceremony that could not undo 4 decades of official neglect. The revelation of American code-breaking success shocked Japanese naval officers more than any other aspect of their defeat. During post-war interrogations, many refused to believe the claims until they were shown actual decrypted messages they had sent years earlier, complete with their own signatures. The psychological impact was devastating. They had been fighting an enemy who could read their most secret thoughts, their deepest strategic intentions. Admiral Fukudome Shigeru, who had served as Combined Fleet Chief of Staff, stated during his 1949 interrogation, "If we had known you were reading our messages, the entire war would have been fought differently. We would have used different strategies, taken different risks. We were fighting blindfolded." Captain Witsuneo, who had headed the Naval Intelligence Division, was even more direct in his assessment of the institutional failure. "Our failure to detect code compromise was inexcusable. The signs were everywhere. Your submarines always in position, your carriers where we didn't expect them. We attributed everything to superior reconnaissance and refused to consider the impossible." This revelation triggered a profound soul-searching that continues in Japanese military circles to this day. How could an intelligence service that had successfully broken Russian codes during the Russo-Japanese War fail so completely to protect its own communications? The answer lay in a dangerous combination of technological ignorance, institutional arrogance, and rigid thinking. The Japanese had never truly understood the revolution that IBM machines represented. While they struggled with manual encryption, believing it inherently more secure, Americans were processing millions of code groups electronically. The technological gap was profound. One side was fighting with outdated methods, stubbornly adhering to manual processes, while the other embraced cutting-edge, albeit primitive, automation. The Japanese never developed mechanical encryption comparable to Germany's Enigma, never employed IBM-style processing, and never understood that computational power could ultimately defeat mathematical complexity, no matter how intricate. By 1944, American cryptanalysts were experimenting with even more advanced technologies. Primitive computers, using telephone switching equipment, could attack super-enciphered code groups. Photographic techniques allowed rapid copying of recovered code values. Radio teletype enabled near-instantaneous intelligence sharing across vast distances. Each innovation widened the gap between American capabilities and Japanese assumptions, pushing the Imperial Navy further into its blind spot. Joe Rochefort died on July 20th, 1976, at a Little Company of Mary Hospital in Torrance, California. In his final hours, too weak to sit up, speaking barely above a whisper, he gave one last interview from his hospital bed. "People ask if I'm bitter about my treatment. I'm not," he rasped. "The work was its own reward. Every Japanese message we decoded, every American life saved. That's my medal. We proved that in modern war, information is more powerful than firepower. A small team in a basement defeated the Japanese Navy more thoroughly than any fleet engagement could have. We sank ships with mathematics, destroyed plans with analysis, defeated strategy with intelligence. The real lesson isn't about code breaking. It's about hubris." The Japanese were so certain of their superiority they couldn't conceive being outsmarted. They confused complexity with security, tradition with strength. They never understood that the moment you think you're safe is when you're most vulnerable. I spent 3 years reading Japanese admirals' mail. It was the strangest intimacy, understanding enemies better than they understood themselves. I watched their empire collapse through messages they thought were secret. If I have one regret, it's that so many of my team died without recognition. They were heroes who couldn't be celebrated, warriors who fought with pencils and punch cards. History should remember them. The Japanese never knew we broke JN-25. Even now, some refuse to believe it. But we knew, and that knowledge was both triumph and burden. We changed history from a basement in Pearl Harbor. The story of JN-25 and the men and women who broke it stands as one of history's greatest intelligence achievements. A small team of American cryptanalysts, working with primitive computers and extraordinary dedication, systematically demolished Japanese naval communications security and fundamentally changed the course of World War II. The Imperial Japanese Navy never knew their most trusted code was comprehensively broken. Through 3 years of war, through defeats that defied explanation, they maintained absolute faith in a system that betrayed their every move. This blindness, rooted in arrogance and institutional failure, cost Japan the war. The Americans who broke JN-25 received little recognition in their lifetimes. Rochefort was professionally destroyed for his success. His team was dispersed and silenced. Their achievement was classified for decades, obscured by secrecy and bureaucratic jealousy. Yet, their invisible victory was perhaps the most decisive of the Pacific War. Today, in an age of digital encryption, quantum computing, and artificial intelligence, the lessons of JN-25 remain profoundly relevant. No code is truly unbreakable. No system perfectly secure when faced with sufficient intercepted traffic, computational power, and human expertise. Human factors, laziness, routine, predictability, and, most dangerously, overconfidence, remain the greatest vulnerabilities in any cryptographic system. The same institutional blindness that prevented Japan from recognizing code compromise threatens every organization convinced of its own security. Station Hypo's basement is now a storage room, its IBM machines long scrapped, its heroes mostly forgotten by the public. But their legacy endures in every intelligence operation, every code broken, every enemy message decoded. They proved that wars can be won through patience, brilliance, and the methodical breaking of enemy secrets. The Japanese never knew the U.S. Navy had cracked their JN-25 code. That ignorance cost them their empire, their fleet, and ultimately their war. In the history of intelligence failures, none was more complete, devastating, or preventable than Japan's blind faith in a code that had been comprehensively broken. They sailed into a trap prepared by Americans working in a Pearl Harbor basement, intercepting every message, knowing every plan, and waiting patiently for the enemy to sail into the very ambush that ultra-intelligence had prepared. Their story reminds us that in intelligence, the most dangerous enemy is not the one who knows your secrets, but the one you never suspect is listening. The Imperial Japanese Navy learned this lesson too late, discovering only after surrender that throughout the war, American cryptanalysts had been reading their communications, directing their defeat, and ensuring that the empire of the rising sun would set forever on Japan's ambitions in the Pacific. It's a sobering reminder that complacency, especially in the realm of security, is an invitation to disaster, and that the unseen battle of information can be more potent, more destructive, than any direct confrontation. The silent war of the mind can, and often does, determine the course of history.